Good evening, and welcome to St. John's. I'm Michael Hemisat, the president of St. John's University, and I'm honored to be here with you this evening for the 7th annual Eugene McCarthy Lecture, Conscience and Courage in Public Life. Though she's not able to be with us this evening, I send greetings from my colleague, Mary Ann Benninger, the president of the College of St. Benedict. A special welcome to those of you who have come from off campus, especially our trustees and our friends who live farther afield than Collegeville. Also joining us tonight are the McCarthy family members, including the senator's sister-in-law, Muriel, his daughter, Ellen McCarthy, her husband, Charlie Howell, all longtime supporters of the work of the McCarthy Center. So we welcome them back to campus and appreciate all that they do. The man we honor this evening was a special person for many reasons. Eugene McCarthy graduated from St. John's with top academic honors at the age of 19. He excelled also in baseball and hockey while he was here, so he took full advantage of the extracurricular opportunities a liberal arts education offers. He taught here. He was a member of the monastic community for a short time. And he would often come back to campus in this community to recharge and rejuvenate during his time in Congress and in the Senate, and even later as a presidential candidate. As is true for almost all private institutions of higher education, we are deeply appreciative of the many supporters and friends who help make St. John's function. But this evening we are particularly grateful to Catherine and Dan Whalen for endowing the Eugene McCarthy Center for Public Policy and Civic Engagement. Through the center's programs, internships, and other student opportunities, we carry on Senator McCarthy's commitment to the common good and to civic engagement. And while the Whalens are unable to join us this evening, please join me in acknowledging their wonderful and generous support of this program. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Matthew Lindstrom, the Edward L. Henry Professor of Political Science and the Director of the McCarthy Center at St. John's University.
Thank you, President Hemisat, and thanks to all of you who are here, and also to those of you in the overflow space for your attendance and support of the 7th Annual McCarthy Lecture. Just a few quick items of business. First of all, we will have some time after the talk for Q&A. You'll see 2 microphones up here. If you could just come to the mics and queue up. Second of all, the bookstore has books for sale. We'll have a book signing afterwards, so thanks to Cokie for agreeing to do that. And finally, a big thanks to Minnesota Public Radio, who is recording tonight's talk and will rebroadcast, or I guess air this, tomorrow at noon, I understand. Yeah. It is indeed my distinct pleasure to serve as the director of the McCarthy Center, especially because I have the opportunity to work with so many fantastic and impressive students. One of those students is Tyler Brown. Tyler's a junior political science major from Sioux City, Iowa, who works at the McCarthy Center. He is an active student leader, serving on the St. John's Senate as well as the St. John's Board of Trustees. He also chairs the St. Ben's and St. John's College Republicans and participates in the Speech and Debate Club. Thank you, Tyler, for introducing tonight's McCarthy Lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Lindstrom. I'm honored tonight to be able to introduce the 7th Annual Eugene J. McCarthy Lecture, Mary Martha Corinne Morrison Claiborne Boggs Roberts. More commonly referred to, of course, as Cokie Roberts. Upon hearing her full name for the first time, it immediately occurred to me that if Ms. Roberts was short on qualifications and accolades, I could probably double the length of this introduction just by saying that a couple times. But fortunately, experience and accolades are not things that Cokie Roberts is short on, to say the least. Throughout her 40-year career, Ms. Roberts has achieved remarkable distinction as a journalist, author, political pundit, and humanitarian. A graduate of Wellesley College, a prestigious liberal arts school in Massachusetts, Ms. Roberts has been a foreign correspondent for CBS, a congressional correspondent for National Public Radio, and the co-anchor of ABC's This Week. In addition to serving as a political analyst for ABC News and NPR, Ms. Roberts currently writes a weekly column with her husband, Stephen, and has authored critically acclaimed New York Times bestsellers such as Founding Mothers, Ladies of Liberty, From This Day Forward, and We Are Our Mother's Daughters. She is also a proud mother of 2 and grandmother of 6. Deemed a living legend by the Library of Congress, Ms. Roberts has won, among a vast array of awards, 3 Emmys, the Edward Murrow Award for Outstanding Contributions to Public Radio, the Everett McKinley Dirksen Award for Distinguished Reporting of Congress, 25 honorary degrees, and an appointment to the President's Council on Civic Participation, or Service and Civic Participation. She also is in the Broadcasting and Cable Hall of Fame and has been named one of the 50 greatest female broadcasters of all time by the American Woman in Radio and Television. Throughout all of this success, Ms. Roberts has exemplified the very values which the McCarthy Center was founded upon. As a public servant and a presidential candidate, Eugene McCarthy challenged the status quo, sought to inspire a critical and intellectually driven analysis of political issues. Whether reporting on a groundbreaking story, sharing her opinion in an op-ed, or giving voice to some of history's most captivating figures in a best-selling book, Ms. Roberts has conducted herself in the same way, providing a unique and intelligent perspective, which is consistently challenging societal paradigms. We're truly blessed to have you here, Ms. Roberts. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big Benny and Johnny welcome to Cokie Roberts.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. It is a great treat to be here, a real thrill to be with the Johnnies and most especially the Bennies. And I know it is the centennial of the College of St. Benedict, so that is something to celebrate for the whole year and beyond, and that is a great accomplishment for a wonderful institution. And I had the opportunity today to meet with some of the students, and they are terrific. It was a really good session. But I have to say, Tyler had already let me know via the website before I got here how very astute your students are, because I went on to the McCarthy Center website, do my homework, because girls do homework, and there was Tyler, and it said, "What are you reading?" And he said, "Ladies of Liberty" by Cokie Roberts. Very good, Tyler. I must say, the most intriguing thing on that site was politics and a pint. I think Gene McCarthy would approve. I thought I had known Gene McCarthy my whole life, but as I did some research for this, I realized I didn't meet him until I was 5 years old. So I met him only a couple of years after Ellen met him, and he and Abigail McCarthy were an enormous presence in my life and in my family's life, my whole growing up years. Gene and my dad, Hale Boggs, served in Congress together. Abigail and my mom, Lindy Boggs, worked together in all kinds of activities trying to improve the world, but also improve the fortunes of the Democratic Party. And I must say, Tyler, as the head of Young College Republicans, was very kind to introduce me. But he does good work. But, Abigail and my mother stayed very good friends until Abigail died. And she was such a wonderful person of grace and wisdom and intellect. And then when Ellen was old enough to go to Sacred Heart, the families became even closer than they had been because of the congressional connection. And Ellen, my much younger friend, remains my friend, and just recently she was kind enough to come see my mother. So there's a lot of connection here that I feel very strongly about. I remember Gene McCarthy in all the ways that you, of course, have heard about him. He was witty, he was smart, he was irreverent in all the right ways. He was charming when he wanted to be. And, but my firmest and most grateful memory of Gene McCarthy was at my own wedding, which was, my wedding anniversary was last week, so it was 47 years ago. And I recommend marrying nice Jewish guys. But so it was 1966. My father was majority whip of the House. My mother was running everything, and she came to him and she said, "Hale, how many members of the House do you want to have?" And he didn't want to answer. You know, he was being grumpy, and so finally he just said, "All the Democrats." And well, it was after the '64 landslide, and so there were more than 300 Democrats in the House. And so by the time we had them and their spouses and some friendly Republicans and even members of the Senate, the true enemy, and their spouses, and the entire extended family, and then people we actually liked, it got to 1,500 people. 1,500 people, and my mother cooked for the whole thing. I know, it's appalling. My daughter I was married in the yard of my house where I still live, and my daughter got married in the same spot 31 years later, and you can be sure it did not occur to me to cook. But so, and you know, my basic reaction was always, well, you know, it's fine, as long as the people I wanted were there, it was fine. And, you know, we're still living off the wedding presents. But although I have to tell you, members of the Senate, and by then it was Senator McCarthy, members of the Senate tended to give you wedding presents that were pieces of glass. Ellen, you probably have some of these too, that had their own names in them. So they looked like you stole them from their offices, you know. But I have a Hubert Humphrey candy jar. But anyway. What I had not reckoned with was the receiving line for 1,500 people. And what Gene McCarthy did was keep me in champagne through that entire receiving line. So I will be forever grateful to him. And of course, he learned that here. This institution was so key in his life. And did shape so much of who he was. I must say, I didn't know until I was reading up for this that he had actually joined for a while, that he was a novice. And I did learn that he went straight from the Abbey to military intelligence, which makes me wonder what you were teaching him here. But you know, now these days it's really scary. But it is, though, to be serious, of course, fitting that the lecture in his name is titled Conscience and Courage in Public Life. And there was a huge part of me that wanted to take the opportunity of this title to talk about my own parents. My father, member of the House from New Orleans, Louisiana, the Deep South, in the congressional leadership, risked his political life by supporting civil rights, and risked our own lives. I mean, the cross burned on the lawn, that kind of thing. My mother, Lindy Boggs, went into Congress after my father was killed in a plane crash campaigning for a fellow member. She became an enormous champion of causes to help the poor and the disadvantaged, and especially and African Americans, and especially women. Ladies, before my mother was in Congress, you did not have equal access to credit. So be grateful to her for that. And she... And then she served as ambassador to the Vatican, where she brought to the attention of the Vatican hierarchy and the entire international community the issue of human trafficking and sex slavery, something that not only needed attention, but everybody was quite shocked to have this nicey old lady bringing to their attention, and they did pay attention. But she also raised the ire of her party continually because she was staunchly pro-life. And that was a huge part of who she was. She believed in life and the ability for everyone in society to live it equally. And she not only preached that belief, but she lived it every day. But my amazing mother just died recently. So I couldn't get through that speech without blubbering up here, and she would kill me for that. So I will not take that opportunity. I will tell you that when she went to the Vatican, she took the job as ambassador to the Vatican at the age of 81, new job in a new country. And we all thought it was a great idea, the Mama would have a great capstone to a career in public service where she could serve both her country and her church, and we'd get to go to Rome all the time, and that was all good. But then what happened in this country happened, and Mama found herself representing Bill Clinton to the Pope. Now think of it. It was the toughest job in the diplomatic service. And then she went home to Bourbon Street, where she lived, and I mean Bourbon Street, not like out someplace. She lived right smack dab in the middle of all the honky-tonk on Bourbon Street. If you've been to Bourbon Street, you've been past Mama's house. And in fact, when my children were small, we'd walk past the strippers and the other neighbors, and I would say, through the hills and over the woods to Grandmother's house we go. And then she moved from Bourbon Street to the Vatican, and I teased her that the costumes hadn't changed. It was still guys in dresses. But my mother came here, gave the graduation speech at the College of St. Benedict in 1983, and she would have been thrilled to know, she probably did know, that 20 years later, the college established the Institute for Women's Leadership, which is so incredibly important. Its mission of recognizing women as the shapers of our world is one that she would completely agree with and applaud, and should be especially pleased to know that it is named for Sister Nancy Hines. She felt very strongly, that nuns were the original feminists and the role models for successful women. After all, she always said, she always saw women running schools when she was growing up, running hospitals, running the social service agencies. Never occurred to her that women couldn't be in charge. And you've met Sister Coleman. You know that's true. And I had a similar experience growing up in the 1950s, as did Ellen, where we were taught by the wonderful religious of the Sacred Heart, the Society of the Sacred Heart, who took us seriously as girls in the 1950s. That was a radical notion. And they taught us that we could be anything we wanted to be, except priest. And they were bitter about that. They've gotten a little more bitter. I did notice just in this issue of the National Catholic Reporter that Benedictine Sister Vivian Ivantik, age 100, is saying, when I was a little girl, I wanted to be a priest, and I'm not giving up on it. She said this as she celebrated her 80th year in the order. I think it's probably safe to say that women religious had a profound impact on Gene McCarthy as well. There's this beautiful bio of him that St. John's has published and sent to me. And it tells a great deal about his life and has wonderful pictures of him here, telling us that he came to St. John's Prep at the age of 15. Before that, he, quote, attended the local Catholic schools in Watkins. It's as if he arrived as a blank slate here at St. John's. You know what? Too late. Those formative years before adolescence, those were up to his family and the nuns. Women who I believe have shown more courage in carrying out the dictates of their consciences and in awakening the conscience of the nation than any other citizens. And they have historically been more involved in public life than many realize. Nuns have always been the great agents of change in our society, the people representing the powerless, and they have almost always had to do it, to battling both the civil and ecclesiastical powers. Now, you're going to have to bear with me for a little bit of history here, because that's what I do. I write history books. Ask Tyler. And I will give you some of this fabulous history. In 1727, the Ursulines were sent to New Orleans to set up hospitals for French soldiers stationed there. But within a year after they got there, they had established schools for the French colonists, but they had also, now think of this is the early 18th century. They also established schools for Native Americans and free blacks. It was remarkable. They soon opened an orphanage as well. Then the French started sending over these filles de cassette, women, marriageable women for the French soldiers and colonists. Think how vulnerable those women were. And the Ursulines made sure that they were protected and taken in. The bishop, of course, had a fit and said, you know, this is not your writ. Nobody told you to do that. But these were the people on the ground. They were dealing with reality, not some dictate. And they were meeting people that the clerics in Paris and the French planters would never meet. They were having to do the work of making it all, this disparate, new, tiny, burgeoning society work together. And that is something that the nuns in our society continue to do. The immediate past president of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, Pat Farrell, told NPR, "Women religious stand in very close proximity to people at the margins, to people with very painful, difficult situations in their lives. That is our gift to the church." And what a gift it has been, not only to the church, but to the country. Now, the Ursulines were lucky. Their bishop was thousands of miles away. By the time Rose Philippine Duchesne came to America to found the Sacred Heart Order in this country, it was not so easy. She had been promised by Bishop de Bourgh that she would be working with the Indians. This was her dream job. I don't know how she came up with this. I have no idea what her mental image was over there in France about what it was going to be like to work with Native Americans. Who knows? But that's what she had been promised, and that's what she wanted to do. And she and this intrepid group of 3 other French women come to America in 1818. They have this harrowing voyage, there's mutiny on the ship, there's shipwreck, it's all unbelievable. But they finally arrive in St. Louis to collect the money that had been sent ahead for her to establish these Indian missions. And the bishop said no, he'd be keeping that money, and that she would never meet any Indians. He dispatched her instead to St. Charles, Missouri, telling her that it was the city of the future, that St. Louis would never amount to anything. Now, and we have all this correspondence, despite the difficulty in attracting students to the one-horse town where conditions were so awful, she wrote to her sister, "The only oil we have here is bear grease, and it is disgusting." But within weeks after arriving in this strange land with a strange language, she established the first free school west of the Mississippi River. I mean, think of it. It's just incredible what she and these other women did. And she paid for it by the income from the boarding school for wealthy girls. The bishop told her she was not allowed to teach children of color, so she just took them in privately. and taught them herself, sending letters home all the time decrying the racism of that society. Eventually, by the way, she was able to go to an Indian reservation where she never could deal with the language, and she just prayed all the time, and that seemed to work. Then there's Elizabeth Seton, who started the first indigenous religious order in the U.S. in 1809. She's credited with creating the parochial school system. Now, this is one of the things that just makes me completely nuts about history books. You know, you'll be reading something and they'll say, and then women got the right to vote. Really? You know, and then she created the parochial school system in America. Wait, you know, was there something before that? I mean, was it hard? You know, was there some effort involved? Well, of course there was, and it was quite an effort. And she wrote repeatedly to her bishop about the obstacles put in her path by priests who were overseeing her fledgling community. Though her want of confidence in my superiors impeded her work, she still managed to open orphanages, hospitals, and schools to serve people on the margins. And she had to do all that negotiating, all that public lobbying and raising funds and purchasing property and getting people on board at a time when women, of course, had no political or legal rights. So the obstacles were enormous. Later in the century, it was Catherine Drexel who was so concerned about the plight of Native Americans and African Americans that she kept just harassing American politicians about it. When she got no response from them, she went to Italy and met with the Pope, and he said, well, why don't you become a missionary? In other words, you do it. And she started a religious order devoted to the education and welfare of Indians and African Americans, and used her very considerable personal wealth. You wonder why she got the audience with the Pope, and she used that to fund it. For many years, she established schools and churches, particularly in the West and in the South. Xavier University in New Orleans, still the only Catholic institution for African Americans, a wonderful institution that turns out the most African American scientists who become doctors of any school in the country, bar none, year in and year out, started by her. But she met with vigorous and sometimes actually violent opposition because of what she did, especially in her supporting legal challenges to the Jim Crow laws. Then there's Frances Cabrini, who came to the country in 1889 to work with desperately poor Italian immigrants. The Archbishop of New York wouldn't let her go to the Irish or any other well-off Catholics to raise any funds. So she finally found a rich Italian, and that woman decided that she would help Mother Cabrini in setting up an orphanage, and the bishop was furious. He said, she is not a bishop and doesn't feel the weight of business responsibility, and his recommendation was for Mother Cabrini to return to Italy. Well, instead she stayed, and she became the first American citizen to be canonized by the Catholic Church. In fact, the refusal of all of these women to abandon those on the margins, Duchenne, Drexel, Seton, Cabrini, earned each of them sainthood. Now, I don't know where the bishops they battled with ended up for eternity. But I do know their names don't show up in the litany. And the nuns don't give up. This summer we saw again the magical mystery tour of the nuns on the bus, fighting for humane immigration reform. Just one of the most recent lobbying efforts of the Organization of Women Religious, called Network, Founded in 1971 to promote Vatican II's call for justice in the world, the nuns have been pressing for policies to protect and promote those on the margins for more than 40 years now, and they've had many successes. President Clinton named one of their founders, he bestowed on her the Presidential Citizens Medal, one of the highest honors that this country can bestow, citing her work for, quote, social progress in South Africa, for women's rights, and for economic justice. She helped to win passage of the Community Reinvestment Act, which has led to billions of dollars in investment in our inner cities. And just a few weeks ago, the head of Networks, Sister Simone Campbell, was able to bring the words of Pope Francis to the House of Representatives, always a good thing, when she testified in support of funding for the food stamp program. Do you know that in this country today, we have 1 in 5 children going to bed hungry? I mean, that's just shocking. That's not the America we think of when we think of America. We don't want our children to be hungry. And the people who are there fighting to make sure that we try to change that are the religious women. And Sister Campbell was up there. She basically needed a ruler as she scolded Committee Chairman Paul Ryan with the Pope's admonition that, quote, the measure of greatness of a society is found in the way it treats those most in need. And we have new data just today on the income disparities in the country and how the economic gains in the last few years have been entirely in the top 1% of the population. And bringing attention to that is incredibly important if we are to be the kind of society that we believe ourselves to be and that we want ourselves to be. I must say, I got this very funny ballot the other day. If you've ever been a Glamour Woman of the Year, you get to vote on new ones. And 2 of the finalists were the nuns on the bus and Lady Gaga. And, I mean, I want them to win together. And because Lady Gaga was, in fact, a Sacred Heart girl, so I think it would just be perfect. I mean, they could see who dresses up best. And then there is, of course, your own fabulous Benedictine, Sister Joan Chittister. As a piece in just this Monday's Politico, the political newspaper that's hot in Washington these days, put it, quote, she is a living exemplar of courage. Well, she certainly is willing to speak truth to power, and whether it be in Washington or Rome, those domes don't seem to intimidate her. And she fights for peace and for justice and for women's rights, particularly within the church. She says, and I'm quoting her here, we need a new worldview that puts the old one in a new light. And we need the enduring commitment to say it where it is least welcome to be heard. In every office, at every cocktail party, at every family gathering, in every conference, no matter who gets bored with us, no matter who gets tired of hearing us, no matter who gets angry at us for doing it one more time. Now that's courage and conscience in public life. Now, for all kinds of cultural reasons in the country and in the church, as we all know, there are fewer and fewer officially consecrated women. I would say there are probably plenty who are consecrated by God, like my mother and Abigail McCarthy. So now it's up to us, particularly you young women who are Bennies, educated in this remarkable institution, and yes, you Johnnies too. We are the people who must carry on what they have taught us. We have to be the agents of change in society. The official numbers of women religious in this country might have fallen, but I think it's safe to say that the number of religious women who are acting on their faith to serve society is higher than ever before in human history. And many of those of us who feel that calling feel it because of the women religious who taught us and taught Gene McCarthy. Awe-inspiring, holy women, women of spirit, who constantly push us to create a better world for the people of God, to give voice to the powerless, as women religious have been doing throughout our history, even if it makes us all uncomfortable, as it has often made them. That's the courage and confidence we must all take into life, especially public life, where the ability to do good is limitless. Another one of the congressional brats that Ellen and I knew growing up was Chris Dodd, former senator from Connecticut. His father, Tom Dodd, was in the Senate when we were kids. And Tom Dodd's political career ended in disgrace. He was censured by the Senate for some campaign finance violations, and then he lost the Democratic nomination for re-election, then ran as an independent, having the effect of electing the Republican Lowell Weicker. And so the party hated him. He was just in total disgrace as he was dying. And his son, Chris, who had never considered public office, came to his father as he was dying and said, "Dad, knowing what you know now, would you do it all over again?" And he said, without missing a beat, Tom Dodd said, "Absolutely, because no place on earth other than in public office can one person do so much for so many." And that certainly was my experience with my parents and with my sister, my late sister, who also served in public office. And we're one person after another. At my mother's funeral just a couple of weeks ago, people coming up to me by the hundreds, and the letters by the many hundreds of the things that she did for them, both individually in their lives and then in the ability to change the world through legislation. So any of you young people who are willing to go in and get into that arena, please go for it, because we need you. We need you to do that kind of work as a public servant. That's what Eugene McCarthy did. And you know that he did it gloriously. You know that he was also, of course, a poet. And I was struck when I read the mission statement of this great university. It ended with the commitment to, quote, passion for excellence, truth, learning, beauty, love, and personal growth. And those words reminded me of the charge issued by another poet, whom Eugene McCarthy and I both loved, my late sister Barbara Sigmund, who willed to her sons in her poem Bequest a passion for beauty and justice to hound you, inspirit you, push you, and pursue you all the days of your lives. That's what I wish for myself, for all of you. That's what the women religious in this country have been charging us with for centuries. That passion gives us the courage to act on conscience and to go into the public arena to make a difference. Thank you very much. Questions, please. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bridget Cummings. I just want to thank you again for coming out tonight.
I met Bridget earlier today. She's a terrific St. Benedict student. Majoring in political science.
Yep. I promise I won't ask the same question twice.
That's all right.
I'd love if you could tell us a story about your most intense interview.
You know, I'm not good about best, worst, all of that, but intense is a different way of putting it. And that one I actually can answer. I was interviewing Ross Perot on Nightline. He was my only guest. And it was, as you might recall, in the 1992 election, he was in And actually, as the conventions began, when the Democrats went into their convention in 1992 in New York, Ross Perot was running ahead of Bill Clinton and George Bush in the polls. And during the Democratic convention, he pulled out. And then he was kind of sad. So he started toying with the issue of getting back in, which of course, as you know, he did. But he kept saying that it was, up to his 50 state coordinators. And so the day I had him on Nightline was the day that he had qualified on all 50 state ballots, to be on the ballot in all 50 states. So there was really only one question, which is, are you in? And so he comes on and he gets testier and testier and testier. And I think, oh my God, he's going to walk out, And then what am I going to do? As Susan Stamberg says, my interpretive dance spring. I mean, and so I was terrified that he was going to leave and I was going to be stuck on set by myself. He did stay until the end. And then about a half hour later, he calls me, half hour after Nightline. And he says, Cokie, I thought we were going to talk about the deficit. I had my charts and everything. And I said, Mr. Perot, you knew what we were going to talk about. And I have to tell you, I think you were quite rude to me. Well, nobody had said that to him since Annapolis days. And just to sort of prove the point, he hung up. But I have to tell you, it was kind of disappointing to have him be so angry because, unbeknownst to me, earlier in the summer, we had apparently had something of a flirtation. Think of it. And because he had hired a Democratic and Republican consultant, one of each, to come down because that was the whole point of his campaign, right, that he was neither party. And it was Hamilton Jordan, the late Hamilton Jordan for the Democrats, and Ed Rollins for the Republicans. And Ed told me the story and then wrote it in his book that he got there, and after he got there, he was given a piece of paper, and he said, what's this? And he said, this is the short list for vice president. And on it were two names, mine and that of William French Smith. And Ed said, actually, this list is shorter than you think it is. Because William French Smith has the disadvantage of being dead. And so I then checked my Constitution. It does not say anywhere that the vice president has to be alive, which probably explains a lot in human history, but American history. But anyway, that was the tensest, yes. Over here? Is there somebody? Okay. Questions? No questions. That's unheard of.
I'm Audrey Mark. I'm from northern Wisconsin. First off, I'd like to know, did you know Mr. Wellstone?
I did know Mr. Wellstone, absolutely.
And we have a new president of our leader in Iran.
I'm sorry?
There's a new president, our leader in Iran. Is there any hope that they make it better relationships with the United States there?
The new president of Iran?
Yeah.
Well, there are some hopeful signs. He sent out a tweet on Rosh Hashanah. I mean, these are words that are just remarkable, aren't they? And, sort of saying Happy New Year to the Jews. So that surprised everybody. And his name is like Hashani, which is much easier to say than Ahmadinejad. My daughter taught me that the way to remember that was, oh, my dinner jacket. And, the president has said in recent interviews that they are making overtures and that there might be some hope there. Unfortunately, in Iran, the elected civilian leader is not really the strong person. And so that's what you're still dealing with. So, yeah.
Is this on?
Yes.
Okay.
Put it closer to your mouth, please.
Like this?
That's good.
Okay. I can take a lesson from the
Yeah,
newswoman.
I do mics.
So, you are well known to me as a shrewd observer of what's happening on the national and international scene. So I wanted to ask you something about the our interesting events in Syria recently. The reports on the news media, including NPR, used phrases regarding Secretary Kerry's news conference that he had backed into this, it was a lucky blunder or something like that. But I am wondering if, in fact, this was carefully engineered. And so I was wondering what you thought.
I think
Thank you.
carefully engineered would be overstating it. No, I don't mean to be flip here. What apparently, as best we can piece it together, happened was that Kerry did make this kind of offhand statement. Well, could they do anything to avert a strike? Well, yeah, they could give up all their chemical weapons tomorrow, but that's not going to happen, right? And then there apparently had been, I mean, we hear from the president, conversations between Obama and Putin about that at earlier meetings. And so Kerry's probably offhand remark seems to have set that into real motion. The combination of the fact that it looked like the United States really was going to strike, and that Kerry's remark sort of reminded everybody that, wait, maybe there is a way out here. They then started to sit down and do it. But was it that something they sat through and say, today you do this and tomorrow? No, no. First of all, life doesn't work that way, and certainly, diplomacy doesn't work that way. And, one of the things that's very interesting about both writing and reading history, and even recent history, is that, Cuban Missile Crisis has been kind of held up as brilliance on Kennedy's part, but now that everything has been released, you see it was a similar sort of story of stumbling towards success. And that might be where we are here. I think that would be a more accurate description of it rather than carefully engineered. But we're not there yet. And the administration is being very, very clear on that. That, don't think this is a done deal. It is not a done deal.
Ms. Roberts.
Sir.
My name is Bruno. We'll leave it at that. Our
Nice
son
to meet you.
graduated from St. John's 5 years ago. At 70, pushing 74, I am still concerned about what's happening with the young. And I look at, in 1968 was a tumultuous year for this entire country. With McCarthy. But what would McCarthy say regarding the present situation and not having a draft? Had we had the draft, and also, in addition to the draft, with our having to go into Iraq, would our legislators have allowed that to happen, knowing that there would have been a draft across the board, instead of young people going and spending 4 and 5 tours of duty, and the rest of the society not even caring? We have 2 1%ers.
Right.
The 1% who defended this country in a way that has never happened in history. As a historian, this is not right. This is not what this country is about. If we're going to do it, it has to be everyone.
Well,
Our son was in the
I-
ROTC, real quick here. In his first year, coming back from St. Ben's with a colleague, he was referred to as a mercenary, or a
Well,
future mercenary.
First of all, that's very unusual in the current society. We are honoring our military in a way that is appropriate, I think. In almost every gathering, there is a reference to the brave men and women who are serving. It's usually in the prayers of the faithful. It is not like Vietnam in that way. I would not have the audacity to assume what Eugene McCarthy would say. I have no idea. But I do agree with you that this is a situation where we have a very few, now they're volunteers, but still, a very few people bearing the burden for all the rest. There's been some advantages to that for those people. The role of women in the military has greatly improved because they need them so much. But, and they need smart women so much. But these 4 and 5 and 6 deployments are horrendous for those people and for their families. And I think that is certainly something that we should pay attention to as a country. It is a very serious and difficult problem. And many of them are also people, by the way, when you talk about cutting food stamps, a lot of the people who are on food stamps are people in the military and their children. And that is, another part of the equation to be looked at. It is not the first time it's happened in our history. In the Civil War, people paid other people, many of them Irish immigrants, to go into the army for them in the North. So it is not anywhere near the first time, but it is not a good time, I agree.
I appreciate that you encourage the women in the audience to get involved in political life. I think that's extraordinarily important, and since all the laws and what happens that really come out of Congress, except when it's dysfunctional as it is right now, we need women there. But I would ask you to make an honest assessment of, seeing as that we're at, what, 18-20% of Congress as women right now.
17, yeah.
17. An honest
I
assessment.
can actually do the math in the Senate because there are 100 of them, so it's 17%. And I think in the House it might be 16.5 or something.
Yes, right. So under 20%, when we are certainly 50% of the society. So would you give an honest assessment of the impediments or what stands in the way of women attaining high public office?
Well, there are two things. One is the voters and the other is the candidates. And what I mean by that is, so you talk about Congress being dysfunctional, which it is. To the degree that Congress is dysfunctional, women don't want to be there. And so it becomes a sort of, self-perpetuating problem. There is also a problem in terms, so from the candidate's perspective, what's the problem? Why don't the women want to do it? Because recruiting good women is not easy. Moving to Washington's hard. Dealing with your family in 2 different places is hard. These are the arguments that you hear. So at the state level, it really is considerably easier to get done. Now, even in the state legislature, it hasn't gotten above, it was going up from the 70s on, and then it just sort of leveled off at about 22% nationwide. It's obviously higher in some places than others. It's higher in places where you're not paid. So I think that there's sort of a combination of women not wanting to just get into it. It's hard. A lot of people see it as dirty, all of those things. Seeing politician as a dirty word, and which is, it's not. So I think that it's a lot of trying to convince women, that they should get in and they can make a difference, which they can. And in fact, the only bastion of bipartisanship in the Senate is the women. They do get together for a regular monthly meal. I accuse them of just trying to be in a testosterone-free zone, but they say that's true, but that it's also true that they really get things done. They can sit down together and accomplish things, and it's just nice to be together. Nancy Pelosi tells a story. She has it in her book, too, but it's just one of those stories where this is just a little example, right? So she and Barbara Kennelly, who was in the Congress from Connecticut, used to go to dinner together with 4 guys. They were big buddies. They all had a regular dinner together. And you know, it all started off fine, and then the men would just completely take over the conversation, and the women would just, you know, just give up. And one night, they started talking about childbirth. And I guess there were 3 women. And among the 3 women, they had 11 children. So they had experienced childbirth. And they thought to themselves, now they're bound to turn to us on this one, right? No, didn't happen. And when Nancy called them on it, the men all said, oh, that's not true, you know. And it happened to me yesterday. It happened to me yesterday in a meeting where I said something, and like 5 minutes later, a guy said exactly the same thing, right? And I said, didn't I just say that? You know, but there's that waiting for your lips to stop moving, you know, that's all they're doing. So I think, you know, getting over those hurdles is hard, and especially when you feel like you can do something good someplace else. So, you know, convincing people to do it, to get into it, to raise the money, all of that is very difficult. So the candidate issue is real. The voter issue is much less real than it used to be. We know that there's certain groups in the electorate that are less likely to vote for a woman, but there's smaller and smaller. It tends to be, by the way, elderly women and Hispanic men. But, and you know, there are barriers that have almost all come down. I mean, every barrier has come down except president and vice president. For a long time, it was true that the only one still left out there was state attorney general. No woman had been elected state attorney. Every other office in the state, but never attorney general. And the theory was that, you know, people just didn't trust women with you know, law enforcement. And so then finally, the first woman attorney general was elected in Rhode Island. Her name was Arlene Violet, which was quite wonderful because it meant that she was General Violet, which was kind of like out of Clue, you know, in the library with the candlestick. So I was very curious what had happened to, you know, to break the barrier in Rhode Island. And it turned out that Arlene Violet was a nun. And people might not trust women with law enforcement, but they certainly trusted nuns with law enforcement. And so she broke the barrier, and from there on out, there have been quite a few. You know, even in 2008, it's very hard to do accurate polling on this, because everybody lies. You know, if you say to somebody, will you vote for a woman? Of course I'll vote for a woman, you know. So that doesn't work. So you have to sort of say, do you think your neighbor would vote for a woman? You know, I mean, you have to do these questions to try to get at it. And in 2008, 3/4 of the respondents to an LA Times poll said they thought the country would vote for an African American, whereas 2/3 said a woman. So that was still, you know, there. And, you know, we just have to wait and see what happens.
Thank you. I would be interested in your observations on the state of political journalism, how it has changed, where it's going, and whether it can play the public role in the democracy that we depend on it to do.
Well, it depends on what you mean by journalism, which is a big question these days. I'm not kidding. I mean, we're right now in the middle of the Senate debating media shield law. This is a law that would protect people in journalism from being subpoenaed to reveal their sources, right? Because there's been a lot of that going on. And so the Senate committee passed it out, a law that would protect journalists, but the big question they were having was, who is a journalist? You know, is it somebody sitting around in their pajamas with a blog? Is it somebody who tweets and has a following of a lot of Twitter people? And it's not You can tell I don't do that. I suppose if my grandchildren start tweeting, I'll have to tweet, but until that happens. But so that's one question. Do you consider the shout fest on MSNBC and Fox journalism? You know, I mean, these are legitimate questions. Do I think that the people who are writing for mainstream media are doing a good job of covering politics? By and large, yes, I do. And I do think it can be very useful to have the immediate response and crowdsourcing and all of that. Among other things, it can keep you honest, and you can see, you know, sort of how something is playing, so that maybe the way you're calling it is wrong. And, you know, you seeing it one way and everybody else is seeing it another way, that's something useful to know. But it is a time of tremendous change, and there is a huge reaction to all kinds of things that get out there that may or may not be true. But they generally don't come from actual journalists. They generally come from somebody else. And then we have to deal with it.
Hi, my name is Jake Collins, and I'm a student coordinator at the McCarthy Center.
Yes, I met you earlier.
Yes, I just want to first say thanks to the community for coming out. So we really appreciate it, and thank you, Cokie, for coming out as well.
You're a great picture taker.
Thank you. So clearly from your remarks, you did your homework on the lecture. And last year, Mr. Brokaw, Mr. Tom Brokaw, a journalist icon of the United States,
Right.
he gave this lecture. And I guess my question to you is, if you had the opportunity to debate Mr. Brokaw, what would your ideal topic be, and would you win?
Tom and I, we have had many a debate over many a bottle of wine, and nobody wins in that situation, trust me. He's an old and dear friend, and I don't think that, I can't imagine that there would be anything useful by way of debating.
Yes.
My name is Alan Benson, and I kind of have a serious question in regards to RU 486 and abortion, basically Planned Parenthood. And since Roe versus Wade, we've had 54 million Americans basically aborted, and I just would like to know why we're actually funding such a thing, and you know, when are we going to start taking life really seriously? Thank you.
Well, Planned Parenthood, of course, is the primary source of women's health care in many communities in the country. And the money that comes from government sources is not used for abortions. Now, I understand that money is fungible. And so the money that they are using, that they are getting for women's health, they're not using for abortion, so they can use the other money they get for abortions. But defunding them would cut off a lot of women who need health care. So then you're making choices about life. And these are the really tough choices. But I don't think that the answer is to take away from the women who are in need the health care that they need so that they can have a baby and carry that baby to term. And I think that that's... But you know, when I was talking about all the wonderful work that women religious do, that is yet another great service, is to take in and care for young women who are pregnant and give them the courage to choose life. And that is a tremendous service. So, thank you. Thank you. Thank you all so much. It's been great to be with you. Thank you all for coming, and I'll be signing books out there, so I hope to meet you while I'm doing that. Thanks very, very much.